Viewers, welcome back. Let me move on to the discussion. Shashi, we were discussing about the different issues and all. One part which really I was again discussing with you earlier, that the journalists or the media in India and the media in Bangladesh, they have a tremendous role in this kind of areas. You know, the border killings or the water issues or the Tista. And I remember Prime Minister Manmohan Singh when he visited Bangladesh, and there was going to be a signing thing, and everything was certain, and in the last minute, we did not know that your provincial governments are that powerful in that sense, but nevertheless, it didn't happen. But the media on both sides, how do you see them?
Before I come to the media, let me address the issue because you had raised it before and I didn't reply.
Right.
On the Tista issue, it is part of our normal policy that you consult the Chief Minister of the state concerned. In the case of our government, the UPA government, we were a coalition and we were particularly vulnerable to the refusal of a coalition ally to participate in this and indeed to actually object to it. That is not true of Mr. Modi's government. They don't need a coalition. They have a majority on their own.
Right.
And in any case, Mrs. Banerjee is not an ally of the BJP. So I don't know whether they will take the same attitude. But Mrs. Banerjee herself, the Chief Minister of West Bengal, is beginning to think differently, is what I understand from a couple of quotes in the media. Right. And I would urge our government to do whatever is necessary to bring her on board so that we can go with open arms and an open heart on this issue to the people of Bangladesh. As far as the other issues you've mentioned are concerned, journalism in our subcontinent has, I think, a special responsibility, more so than in other democracies, because of how easy it is in our countries to light a match in a petrol pump.
Oh, yes.
We are seeing that journalism can inflame passions, can cause riots, and therefore the need to be responsible, to check your sources multiple times, to ensure that you don't report gossip and speculation and rumor and even opinion as if it was fact. That facts are sacred and opinion you have to base on facts and not based on rumors.
Exactly.
All of these rules are not being followed in the subcontinent's journalism, neither on television, particularly not on television, which is really, in India, I think, has plumbed very, very low depths. But also, I'm afraid, many of the print media tend to imitate the television channels in order to stay viable. So breaking news, TRPs, headlines, and once you've broken the people, they're broken. You move on to your next victim for what you do about the damage you've caused. So when people, for example, publish false stories about communal violence or communal incitement, whether in my country or in your country, they are doing a disservice to humanity. I mean, they are actually inciting people to believe false things and be impelled or provoked to take or condone retaliatory violence. And the only way that we can really do this sensibly, I don't believe in press censorship, I'm passionately an advocate of press freedom, but is to encourage our journalists to follow the basic professional tenets of their profession, which requires ethics, requires a sense of social responsibility.
No, having said that, the television has been also a major, since I am on electronic media.
I know, that's why I said it. I'm sure you're an honorable exception to say it.
No. The fact is that on electronic, it's difficult sometimes to make news or to create news, as maybe in the print. I'm not comparing the both. But the responsibility part, how does one ensure that? How does? Censorship, you don't believe it. Self-censorship, we don't believe it. Now, responsibility comes from within.
I think professionalism is the answer, because the honest truth is that we are not sufficiently professional. Whether it's the way we train our journalists when they start, whether it's the way we maintain them to standards, the bodies of accountability, whether it's a press council or an editors guild or a federation of journalists, whatever, there seem to be no mechanisms in place in either of our societies to hold journalists to account within the profession. You say that self-censorship we're not in favor. Of course we should not be. Censorship is never the answer.
True.
But if you have a genuine mechanism where you say that such and such news report violated the fundamental professional canons by mixing up fact, rumor, speculation, gossip, opinion all in one, and presenting the nation with incomplete or inaccurate information. And therefore the journalist should be punished or whatever by losing his position or losing his license or losing his column or whatever it may be. Unless we have these mechanisms within the profession, then irresponsibility will continue to infect others. I know that one of the famous cliches of Evelyn Waugh's famous book about journalism, Scoop, was that when one person publishes a false story, the editors ask all the others, why don't we have the story? Why unhave was the famous expression in a cable. So the others feel obliged to report along the same lines, even though they know this chap sat by the swimming pool and made it up.
True, we face it. Coming back to yourself, you have been to Davos, and there I mentioned earlier that the WEF named you as the global leader of tomorrow.
Not there are many others.
Okay, leader. Can you explain of tomorrow, the word tomorrow?
I think tomorrow has come and gone for him.
Come on now.
This was 1998, now 16
well, you are
years
here.
ago.
Tomorrow has not gone, it's here.
And they name a few people every year, or they named, I think they've stopped doing so now.
Yeah.
And I was so honored.
What was the criteria?
I think you had to be under 40 or something, and I had been nominated before I turned 40, and I was 42 by the time they gave it to me, but they seemed to not worry about that. It was a way of recognizing young leadership.
I see.
That's why the tomorrow part.
I see.
Across the world. And there were people of different nationalities, different backgrounds, some in the business sector, some in politics, some in journalism, etc. It was a widespread designation. Having said that, what I'm honored by is that people have taken an interest in the kinds of ideas and values that I've tried to represent. All my life I have tried to advance a certain vision of pluralism, of coexistence, of cooperation with people, liberal ideas within society and between countries. And these are things which I'm proud to be associated with and which I will carry to my pyre, to my grave. And therefore, to my mind, if these various awards you have listed have anything in common, it would, I hope, not just be the style with which I have done something or a particular result, but rather this content, which I hope is humane and reaches the largest number of people directly in their hearts.
Wonderful. Now tell me, you have been in politics how long?
6 years.
6 years. What has been the most dramatic experience you had doing politics in India?
There have been too many almost. I mean, I really have been through a significant series of Agni Parikshas in
you
the course
passed all
of my
of them,
time.
Of course.
Well, so far I've survived, but I'm singed, I've got scars everywhere. So there are stiletto marks in my back as well.
Comes with the package.
Well, actually, I think I've been singularly disfavored. I honestly...
Is that how you feel?
I do feel that I've got it worse than most. And I think most objective analysts will agree. Partly because I was an intruder into a relatively closed world.
That's what I thought.
Almost every other politician in India has done it all their lives. Either they have come from political families, so it's their profession, it's part of their DNA, or they have come from their student days and worked their way up. Here is an interloper in their view who has actually had another profession, lived his own life, not had to worry about, seeking votes or sweating in the hot sun in the same way that I sweated in the hot sun in the middle of wars and refugee crises. So I've also known what it's like to be with the underprivileged. But nonetheless, at the end of all of that, I come in, I win my first election, I become a minister, and naturally that creates some resentment. I often say that if you got a deputy into your program who came from a different field, I'm sure all the others who've been working around you will resent him.
Absolutely.
And I got resented the same way. So that was the first problem. The second problem, I think, is that there were a number of people, including in our media, who decided that I made very good copy and that bad news about me made even better copy. And so I was a favorite subject of this breaking news business. I mean, I had spent 3 decades in the international arena, giving interviews, statements, speeches. I was on every world channel for the UN. I did BBC's Hard Talk twice. I did Fox News, the biggest critic of the UN, with Geraldo Rivera. I did all of these things, and never once was I accused of putting a foot wrong or saying a word wrong. Suddenly I come to India and everything I say gets distorted, made into a controversy. So clearly there has to be some malice there as well. Anyway, I've taken it on the chin. The chin is still intact. I've not been broken yet. Well, I've broken a few times, but I've put myself together and moved on. But I would say the unremitting media controversies, the having to resign once from a ministry I dearly loved
Yeah.
and where I was doing a good job because it simply became impossible to continue thanks to the media and political persecution that was taking place. Even though I came back to the government and became a minister again, these scars take a while to heal.
Yeah, I understand your frustrations. I understand how you feel about the media. But like I said, that the end result is people have re-elected you again.
There
and
you
have
are.
come. So the result is good.
But the media will take its toll because I have a much smaller majority now than the first time.
I see. Okay. Okay. I'll take that. But we are coming to the end of the program. And I just wanted to request you, if you want to, like you are the chairman of the Standing Committee on External Affairs, and SAARC comes into play, Bangladesh comes into play, the
Very
neighboring
much.
countries come into play in your area. How do you see the future of Indo-Bangla relations and future of SAARC, which is the,
Well, on Indo-Bangla relations, I would say that they have never been stronger. And the only way they can go is in greater strength, greater depth, and greater friendship.
It's not a hegemony of anybody.
No, of course not.
Okay.
India knows that hegemony does not pay.
Okay.
I shouldn't say hegemony does not pay. Attempts at hegemony don't pay.
Okay.
Because no one likes to be either talked down to or pushed around.
Right.
I mean, you can ask the Mexicans what they think of America. Whatever. any big country.
True.
The small neighbors are going to be particularly wary and cautious
Exactly.
about the big shadow of the big brother.
Sure.
And therefore, I think that that the way things are between India and Bangladesh today are extremely healthy because they're mutual respect and mutual wins. I think India recognizes right across SAARC that there has to be an asymmetrical relationship because we account for 70% of the population of the South Asian countries and 80% of the GDP. So naturally, anything we do will occupy more space around the table than the other countries of SAARC.
True.
So we have to give more than we take. It's very obvious.
Right.
And that's why I have some hope for SAARC, though unfortunately the natural organic development of SAARC has been bedeviled by the unremitting hostility of Pakistan to India and their unwillingness to go along with the SAARC consensus on many issues. Increasingly, I have veered around to the view, this is a personal view and not as chairman, to the view that we should have more and more emphasis on sub-regional multilateralism.
Right.
That is, why can't India, Bangladesh, Bhutan and Nepal, for example, develop this corner of the subcontinent together? Water resources shared, transit access,
Energy
trade.
sector,
The
right.
four of us have common issues,
Yeah.
which have nothing to do with Pakistan. It doesn't affect Pakistan one way or the other.
Right.
Let us go ahead and not let them veto our ability to cooperate with each other. I think if more and more countries see things this way, we will continue. SAARC can grow, but we should not allow SAARC to be held back by its weakest link. We should try and advance
But you could
toward the
help
strongest
the
direction.
weakest link also because they're having their own problems.
Look, we have
internal.
always been willing. We have, frankly, let me be very blunt with you. Pakistan has nothing we really want. Okay, there is one territory we claim. We are prepared to put that dispute on the back burner, just as we have put the border with China on the back burner. And still, we have very good trade with China. Over $70 billion of trade. We're increasing travel, tourism, everything. We're willing to do the same with Pakistan. India has never had a chip on its shoulder about Pakistan. Pakistan, sadly, has a chip on its shoulder about us. They continue to say that Kashmir is their jugular vein and all of this nonsense, and they go on about wanting. And then sadly, they have encouraged and in many cases financed, directed, equipped terrorist attacks on Indian soil.
That's the
so
sad part.
naturally, that is something that we cannot accept. Which country, which self-respecting country will? We would like to help. You know that we have offered help to Pakistan after every natural disaster. Earthquakes, we have offered help. River floods, we have offered help. Anytime there is a problem, we offer our helicopters, we offer food, we offer money. It is Pakistan that has found it difficult to accept. They say, give it to us through the UN, we don't want it from you. Or they say, give us your helicopters, don't give us your pilots.
Right.
No, I mean, we are a self-respecting nation also.
Of course.
You know, we're not going to be treated in that way.
Of course.
And nor are we going to negotiate with a gun pointing at our head. We will negotiate. We are interested in peace. Peace is in our interest because peace is what enables us to develop our own country and help our people grow and prosper. But we will never go for peace and negotiation at the cost of our self-respect.
Of course.
No country would, and no big country certainly can afford to do so.
Wonderful. So, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, time has come to wrap up the program. It was really very interesting to talk to you, and I'm sure the viewers have also learned a lot of things. And hopefully, when you next time, I hope the gap will be much shorter, and we can have you on so many subjects that you deal with. We can have another discussion.
I certainly won't wait another 20 years, I can assure you that.
On behalf of Mazharanga Television, I thank you for.
Thank you. Really pleasure. Great
It's a
pleasure.
pleasure. Viewers, this is Fahim Munaim signing off. Goodbye.